Here's something to think about. What happens when the very place that's supposed to help you find God ends up getting in the way? What happens when the people or institutions or even nations who wear God's name as a badge are the ones who prevent you from free and unhindered access to God? What's up, everybody? I'm Tyson Putthoff, and this is scene 5 of the JesusX30 challenge, a 30-day discipleship challenge. Today is one of the more exciting moments in the early phase of Jesus's campaign. We really get to watch him at this point take his first real public swing at the worldly systems that he's come to bring down. He's already recruited some early followers, Andrew, Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel. He's turned water into wine at the wedding in Cana, a small town not far from his hometown of Nazareth up in the Galilee. Interesting, too, that the miracle almost didn't happen. If you remember the story in John 2, Jesus was a little reluctant to rush things. He was about to go public with his messianic campaign, but he wasn't quite there yet. So he has this moment when his mom, Mary, comes to him and says, "Hey, Jesus, the wine's almost gone." He's at a party, at a banquet, a wedding reception, and he knows what she's getting at. We're not told why, but Jesus actually seems a little hesitant at this moment. Either he's just nervous to go public, because after all, he knows how his messianic campaign is going to end, with a crucifixion at the hands of Rome. So he needs a little prompting to get him to take that leap and to go public and get the campaign up and running. Now, keep in mind that while Jesus is 100% divine, he's also 100% human. So nerves, that human fight or flight response that we all experience at some point, those are part of his own human experience too, just like they are for you and me. It's either that or it's that he already has his first public act planned out. So he hasn't launched his campaign yet officially, publicly. He's done a couple of things. He's gotten baptized by John the Baptist. He's gone out into the wilderness and encountered Satan and had that standoff. But he hasn't actually done much in terms of putting himself in the public eye yet. And if you really read the Gospels and you look through my books, you really start to see that everything Jesus says and does is part of a strategy. So it may be that Jesus has his public act, his first major moment in taking his campaign public, already planned out. He already knows what he wants to do. And that's what's going to happen shortly when he goes down to Jerusalem and has a moment in the temple. And so it might be that his reluctancy here in John 2 to turn the water into wine and having to have his mom say, "Jesus, it's time," maybe it's because he wants to go public in a different way. Either way, he goes ahead and does it. He turns the water into wine, puts his name on the map. It's not this massive moment where he goes and goes viral just yet. It's a small town. It's a local event. So it puts him on the map with the locals. Next, we find him on his way down to Jerusalem in the temple. And keep in mind, this is spring of 27 AD, historically, chronologically, and Jesus is going down Jerusalem for Passover. And now he's about to turn it up a notch in none other than the Jerusalem temple. And what he does there, it's not polite. It's not this spiritual thing in the way that many of us have interpreted it. It's disruptive. It's destructive. It's disrespectful. It goes against all the established social and religious and economic and political rules. In other words, the worldly rules that he's supposed to be following, it's completely on purpose and it's completely antithetical to all of those rules. So he's in Jerusalem, spring of 27 AD for Passover. And that's important because Passover is when the city swells to tens of thousands of Jewish worshipers who travel from all over the region to participate in the festivities, to celebrate and to remember the Exodus, to offer sacrifices at the temple. Passover, or Pesach, is the annual festival that celebrates Israel's liberation from slavery in Egypt. It's kind of the defining moment in Israelite identity and memory. And it commemorates the night when, remember this, God passed over the Israelite homes during the 10th plague and brought about their freedom. By Jesus's time, over 1,000 years after the event, it was the pilgrimage festival like 4th of July or Thanksgiving or the Super Bowl all rolled up into one. And Jerusalem would swell in population from about maybe 40,000 to upwards of 100, 150, 200,000 people, as Jews from all over the Roman Empire would come to remember their deliverance and offer sacrifices at the temple. Every street, every alley, every rooftop would be packed. And a fun fact, historical records say you could actually smell the roasting lambs from miles and miles away. So Jerusalem is overwhelmed. The temple is packed, tensions are high. This is not only just a celebration, but it's a celebration of liberation. So it's really a celebratory, but really a politically charged moment. And for Jesus, this is the perfect moment to make his first really demonstrative move, way more aggressive than anything he's yet to do just a month or a couple months into his public campaign. So let's talk about what actually happens. According to John 2, this scene takes place in the outer courts of the temple, the court of the Gentiles. This area is meant to be a sacred space where non-Jews could worship the God of Israel. Okay? But by Jesus' day, this scene had been turned into a chaotic marketplace. Because if you were a pilgrim, a worshiper coming from somewhere far away to Jerusalem for Passover, you needed a number of things. You needed the right currency, temple-approved coins, in order to purchase animals for sacrifice. Okay? So that meant that wherever you were coming from, you had to exchange your own local money, like let's say Galilean coinage, if you were coming from the Galilee, like Jesus and his family, and you would have to exchange it for an approved high quality coin, like a Tyrian shekel. In this case, a Tyrian shekel had a high silver content and was really the only currency at this time accepted by the priests in the temple. And since most people didn't bring livestock with them on their journeys, they had to buy their sacrificial animals on site. You can imagine Jesus coming several days away, or other worshipers coming from a week away or 2 weeks away and traveling along these roads. You're not going to bring your animals along with you. You can't show up to the temple with a dead bird, right? So you had to buy those animals in the temple, and you had to use the right coinage to buy that animal in the temple and to offer it to the priests, and the priests would then offer the sacrifice on your behalf. So when we read this story about Jesus and overturning the tables, and we hear sermons about Jesus overturning the tables and it's all bad, it was all commercialized, that's not the case. The system was actually convenient and necessary, okay? Because it provided worshipers what they needed in order to worship and sacrifice and ultimately have that encounter with God in the temple. But because it was necessary for most worshipers, it became corrupt. The exchange rates were rigged. The prices were jacked up. The entire operation basically became something that lined the pockets of these priestly and political and economic elites. This wasn't just religious commerce. This was exploitation baked into the system and allowed to operate right in the middle of God's house. So Jesus walks in, he sees this, and he just goes off. He erupts. He doesn't make a quiet protest. John actually tells us he makes a whip out of cords. He starts to flip the tables, drive out the animals, and shouts, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." All in John 2. And it's one of the only violent, disruptive actions we actually see from Jesus. But you have to take note, it's directed at a system that specifically exploited the poor and blocked access to God. It's not just about bad behavior. It's about a broken structure. Jesus is systematically in this moment dismantling a system that claimed to mediate between God and people, but was actually profiting off of this encounter. It's a little like going to a sporting event. We've been to a lot of OU and OSU and Thunder, and I grew up going to Royals games and a few Chiefs games over the years. When you go to one of those games, you can't bring your snacks in. Can't bring your own water bottles, nothing. So if you get hungry or thirsty, you have to buy food and drinks once you're on the inside. And I'm not sure who sets the pricing, but I do wonder who decided that a bottle of Dr. Pepper, a slice of pepperoni pizza, and maybe some Sour Patch Kids should cost 28 bucks. It's kind of mind-blowing. But if you're there with the family, you're going to get thirsty. Your kids are going to get thirsty. They're going to want snacks. So you do what you have to do. You sell an organ and you purchase food for the day. The system feels a little bit exploitative, you know, but in this case, everyone's paying the price. You know what to expect. You know that's how it operates. Worshippers in the ancient world faced a similar setup when they arrived at the temple. Prices for sacrificial animals and coin exchange fees were jacked up, but it wasn't just inconvenient, it became spiritual. If you couldn't afford the inflated costs, you weren't just going to go hungry for a few hours until you get home from the game. You were left feeling unworthy to worship. You couldn't participate in the ritual. You couldn't make your offering. And in the eyes of the religious and social and economic and political system, you were less faithful or less acceptable to God if you couldn't participate, if you didn't have what it took to pay for the sacrificial animals to be able to participate in the sacrificial rituals. That's what made Jesus furious. Let me also dispel a myth about what's going on here. We hear about this cleansing of the temple moment, and there's a lot of bad takes. Really bad interpretation of this that I've heard way too often. Jesus wasn't walking in and critiquing commerce in the temple. He wasn't condemning having a Starbucks kiosk or selling merch, t-shirts, or hats in your church, okay? Had nothing to do with that. Jesus isn't just mad about commerce, even if it's in a place of worship. That's how things operate. They always have and they always will. What he's furious about is the entire setup is endorsed and maintained by the elites, and it's putting up barriers between people and God. That's what he's furious about. From the beginning, the tabernacle. Remember the mobile tent-like structure that the Israelites carried in the Exodus? God would descend into the tabernacle and they would worship and present sacrifices to him. Later on, under the reign of King Solomon, they built the temple in Jerusalem. And by Jesus' day, that temple had been destroyed and another one rebuilt. From the beginning, the tabernacle, so the tent, and then later the temple, was meant to be the place where heaven and earth touched. Literally, it was kind of this other space where God and heaven and earth and humanity intersected. In Exodus 25:8, God actually says, "Let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." The access point between humanity and God became the temple. And that was the point. The point was access. The point was presence. God wanted to be with his people. And the temple was the physical location, the Beth El, literally the house of God. The physical location where seekers, no matter where they came from, could come near and enter into the presence of the God of the universe. But by Jesus' time, that original vision had really been twisted. What was meant to be a house of prayer for all nations, or literally a house in which we encounter God, had become a spiritual toll booth. If you had money, you could approach. If you didn't, you were out of luck. The poor, the marginalized, the foreigner, they were basically being pushed out of the way so that powerful and wealthy and elite and the already accepted, whether it was because of their nationality, whether it was because of their social status, whether it was because of their economic clout, they became accepted. Everyone else became pushed out. Worship had become transactional. The leadership had allowed and benefited from a system that literally blocked people from encountering God unless they could pay the price. And that's exactly what Jesus came to destroy. Jesus flips out, not because he's anti-temple, but because he's anti-barrier. He's against any system, structure, form of religious leadership that keeps sincere worshipers and seekers from the presence of God. That's what sets him off. But then he goes even further. So after flipping tables and driving out the people and making a bold but kind of cryptic declaration, destroy this temple and I'll raise it in 3 days, people are confused. They think he's talking about the actual temple building, the mega structure that this temple was by Jesus' day. Building it in 3 days, there's no amount of manual labor or technology that can do that. So they're obviously confused about what he's talking about here. But he's talking about himself. He's saying, I am now the place where heaven and earth meet. I am the new temple. I am the physical, living, breathing embodiment of God's presence on earth. And the scandal of it all is that access to this temple doesn't cost a thing. You don't need money to exchange. You don't need the right currency. You don't need to buy an animal. You don't need to pass through a religious gatekeeper. You just come. God isn't locked behind a paywall. And Jesus is flipping the whole system to make that abundantly clear. Now, there's a bit of debate about this whole scene. This is mentioned a number of times in the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the story at the end of their Gospels. John puts it in John chapter 2 here at the beginning, before Jesus has really gone public. And there's a debate. Most scholars and thinkers will say, no, it only happened once at the end, and that's what got Jesus in trouble. And John is putting it at the beginning because he's making more of a theological point about what's happening. I actually think it happens twice. I think it happens where John places it at the beginning, and it happens again at the end where Matthew, Mark, and Luke are placing it. So think about it. At this point, Jesus isn't famous yet. He's not being tracked and followed around by crowds. He doesn't have a bunch of opponents. Nobody really knows who he is, so he can move a little more freely. And as we talked during Passover, Jerusalem is jam-packed with pilgrims, with worshipers, tens of thousands of them. The temple was massive, about 35 acres, and the court of the Gentiles, where this scene actually goes down, was roughly the biggest part of it. Roughly 10 to 12 acres, huge crowds, lots of noise, a few Roman guards and temple police for protection and security, but there are no cameras, no facial recognition, no high-tech surveillance. So it would have been really easy for someone like Jesus, totally unknown at this point, to walk in, cause a stir over in one area of the temple precinct that was massive, and then slip out before anyone really knew just what happened. And that's exactly what he does. If you look in the very next chapter, in John chapter 3, Jesus actually disappears. He meets with Nicodemus at night. Again, no one sees him. Then he heads into the Judean wilderness after this, probably to reconnect with John the Baptist. And I think this is a strategic moment. He goes out to meet John the Baptist, to debrief, to recalibrate, to kind of figure out his next move. It's sort of a hit and run, a strike and retreat tactic, a stick and move. Jesus wasn't throwing a fit. He was sending a message, stirring the waters, and then he was staying one step ahead of the authorities because he's got a lot of work to do before he goes and ends up on the cross. So we asked at the beginning, what happens when people or systems prevent others from free and unhindered access to God's presence? I think Jesus gave us a clear answer to that day in the spring of 27 AD. And I think that his answer is still true today in 2025 AD. If you've ever felt like something or someone is standing between you and God, you're not alone. That's what was happening in the temple courts that day. People were coming to worship, coming to meet with God, and instead they hit a wall. Fees, fine print, expectations, shame. And Jesus comes along and says, nope, I'm done with this. And he flips out. That moment wasn't just about temple politics. It was about us as well. Because a lot of us still, I think, carry the weight of that spiritual performance we're expected to achieve. We think we need to clean ourselves up first, or know more, or give more, or prove that we're sincere enough. And honestly, sometimes the loudest voices that are telling us that are telling us we're not good enough, or that we need to do this or that before we can encounter God directly. I think those are external voices, absolutely, but I also think that they're in our own heads. But Jesus comes into that noise and he clears it out. And he doesn't just flip the tables, he flips the whole system. He invites you and me to come close to him. No fees, no tests, no spiritual credit score. Jesus is the temple now. He's the meeting place. And that means you don't have to go through anyone else. You don't have to earn your spot. You don't have to live in shame. You just come and enter his presence. That's the good news. Jesus removes the barriers. If religion has ever made you feel like you're on the outside looking in, I want you to hear this. Jesus isn't the one turning you away. He's the one tearing down the walls so you can walk right in. So whatever weight you're carrying, doubt, failure, guilt, not feeling spiritual enough, bring it. Jesus isn't asking you to qualify. He's just asking you to show up, because his presence isn't reserved for the elite or the polished or the people who have it all together. It's not for this or that political party. It's not for this or that identity or sexuality or economic status or social status. It's for everybody. that you don't have to change. You don't have to clean yourself up before you enter God's presence. That was the message that Jesus was sending loud and clear that day in 27 AD. Jesus' presence is for the hungry. It's for the curious. It's for the tired. It's for the ones who've been told that they don't belong. It's specifically for those people. And if that's you, he's already cleared the space for you. This wasn't just a temple cleansing. This was an invitation, and it still stands today for you and me. Leku Ahmad, go and learn. Come back next time for scene 6 of the JesusX30 challenge.